Phantom Blade Zero is not your typical Souls-like. Well, it's actually not a Souls-like, even though it does get some inspiration from it. It's actually much closer to other action series like Devil May Cry and Ninja Gaiden. Something that was made abundantly clear, especially in the past 48 hours, as we got tons of new gameplay footage and cool mechanics to break down in this video. In fact, a lot of this actually gets me even more excited than ever before. Just looking at the fluidity of the combat, the cool combos, and how action-packed this is, it almost makes it seem like this game is not even real, but it is, and people got their hands on it. So we're gonna jump right in it with some of the biggest details. As always, if you end up enjoying these videos, do let me know in the comments, and also leaving a like and subscribing to the channel does help a ton with the algorithm. That being said, we do have to start with the elephant in the room, because back last year, lots of folks got their hands on the game, and one of the major complaints, so to say, was the fact that the game felt easy, even back then on the harder difficulty. Well, it seems that developer KhrazeGaming actually made some changes to this now, and at least in the version that was played, it was reported that there were 3 settings to choose between in that build. This included Breaker, Initiate, and Fire. However, the highest of the available difficulties in this case felt so challenging that some of the players had trouble actually reaching even the first boss, which is in complete contrast with what was presented last year, when a lot of the folks were pretty much able to breeze even through the first 3 to 4 starting bosses, pretty much even on the hardest available difficulty back then. In fact, there were even reports and leaks about a possible 4th difficulty setting that is much more challenging than anything else, but there may be a special way to actually unlock it. So it definitely sounds like KhrazeGaming is putting a lot of emphasis on difficulty balance, but also providing players with the choice they want to make when it comes to how difficult or easy the game should be. I think that maybe a 2-hour demo of the game at some point would help them even more in terms of feedback for the balance. But with challenge being the word of the day, we do have some information about the game length, and specifically in terms of the main story, it's estimated to take somewhere between 20 to 30 hours to complete. However, there's an additional 20 hours or so of additional side content on top. So this is why I think that exploration is actually the biggest similarity to Souls games, because we can literally see that structure over there with the bonfires, or in this case, I guess, bell shrines, which we can activate, with all of those adjacent and secret routes, all of those ladders that open up shortcuts. However, in this game, obviously, since you're a ninja assassin, you're going to be climbing these much quicker, so that is one quality of life I really appreciate. And speaking of appreciating stuff, the map screen is definitely one of them. I really like the stylized maps. Kind of gives me Black Myth Wukong Title Update 1 vibes over here. But specifically, it's good enough that you know where you are, but vague enough so that it encourages exploration. And especially since exploration seems to be useful in this game, providing many upgrades and possibly even those secret bosses, as it was discussed before. In this case, we can see even Shachi upgrades. Collecting a number of them will progressively provide a percentage increase to our yellow bar. But on a similar note, we do have to talk about the fact that the game also launches with a boss rush mechanic. Essentially, we can rematch as many times as we want all of the bosses from the main campaign, even introducing hidden bosses on top, which sounds really cool. And also on that note, another piece of information is that if you perish in a boss fight that has 2 phases, you're going to respawn directly into the second phase, which sounds like it's reducing a bit of that difficulty, but we have to wait and see how this is. Maybe it's something only available on certain difficulties, but again, I guess more details will follow really soon. However, moving on next, we do have to talk about the weapon system and the combat itself, which I think is the biggest highlight. If exploration was closer to the Souls genre, it seems that the combat is the one closer to Ninja Gaiden, because we can see in terms of available item slots, we only have a couple for the primary weapons, a couple for the secondary weapons, aka the Phantom Edges, 2 for accessories, and 2 for consumables, and that is basically it. Nothing when it comes to armors if you were looking for that. Additionally, weapons are split into 2 main categories. We have 2 slots for the primaries and 2 more slots for the phantom edges, aka the secondary weapons. In total, it's said that there are about 30 or so primary weapons we can find and about 20 plus phantom edges that we can also get. So that brings us to a total of at least 50, which is actually pretty good, but it goes beyond that because it seems that these categories fit a slightly different role. So primary weapons seem to mainly focus on different types of swords, either one-handed, two-handed, great swords and so on, even chakrams from the looks of it, that all kind of have different types of powers. Some of them may feature combos, some of them may feature completely passive mechanics that happen when you attack, others have active abilities. For example, this set of chakrams over here has a combo with square and triangle that when you actually pull it off in that specific sequence, it will perform this ranged attack, throwing in a bunch of successive chakrams at the enemy that also home in towards them. But it also features an R1 mechanic that lets you phase in and out of reality when you perform dodges. Others, such as for example the Juggernaut over here, kinda just fills up a red meter, which you can see on the weapon itself whenever you parry, and then you can unleash that for a devastating attack with triangle. But also an active ability via L2, which consumes that purple resource I was talking about. Meanwhile, the other one over here, we can see that it's actually causing bleed buildup and eventually even creating a hemorrhage effect on the target, supposedly similar to Elden Ring. However, on the other side, we've also seen the Phantom Edges, which kind of fit a few roles. They don't just expand the range of weaponry you get access to with examples such as hammers, axes, and even bows, but it goes beyond just combat. Some of them may even help you in exploration and even tie in to the combo slash weapon switching system of this game. So just to give you an example, at some point a boss was defeated and that boss dropped its weapon, which is called the Bash Pole. And not only is this useful at AoE damage and performing shockwaves, but also tapping R2 lets you smash through weakened floors with it to reveal hidden routes, which again helps a ton with exploration. Which also brings us to the next topic, that of weapon switching and weapon combos, which is another major part of the combat. Specifically, there's a lot of animation cancelling and animations that tie in with one another. You can pretty much combine any attack into the chain of attacks of an existing weapons and even immediately follow up with a combo, as it seems that there's a lot of animation cancelling at play over here. And specifically, the way this is done is via L2 and R2 switching. In this case, L2 corresponds to the primary weapons, R2 to the secondary weapons, and each one of these attacks, special moves in this case, have their own resource associated with it that gets consumed when you perform this. For example, a Phantom Edge secondary weapon shown was this shield with a flamethrower mechanic, so holding down R2 wasn't just there to actually unleash the fire, but the more you held it down, the more fire it spewed, however at the cost of that specific resource continuously going down. But there are many others in the middle of an attack chain. For example, you can just jump in with a secondary weapon and for example smash into the ground to create a shockwave that just throws back enemies. But the examples are likely going to be endless given the fact that we have 50 plus weapons between the two categories. Finally, on the combat, another important aspect is that there's also stealth in this game. Obviously, sneaking around is not just helpful, but will even help you clear out some of the extra enemies so that you can make some of the upcoming fights a little bit easier. And especially stealth-wise, it seems that there are some upgrades over here that let us take down additional targets, not just the primary one. Seems that stealth can be potentially very useful. Kind of reminds me a bit of Sekiro, letting us dispatch targets before actually going in and taking down the rest. However, I do want to mention something about the boss fights. This looks like something that gets really close to that level of creativity that I really appreciated in Black Myth Wukong when it came to boss encounters. But specifically in this case, I really enjoyed the really unique look at this sort of puppet mastery with all of the clones being shifted around the battlefield. That was actually really awesome, and even the background music in this case was really cinematic. But besides that, there's another important aspect of that boss encounter I want to cover, and that is that some of our choices may directly affect how that encounter unfolds. And to be more specific, at some point in this fight, somebody called Red Wraith actually joined the fight, so now the character had to fight against two bosses at the same time. In fact, even taking down Red Wraith before the main Fallen Hope boss enraged that boss and made it even stronger. However, it seems that the reason Red Wraith even joined the fight is because they have been spared before this boss encounter. So seemingly we can make some of the boss fights easier if we choose to not spare certain characters, or depending on some of the other choices too, which I guess you may want to take if you don't want to get absolutely blasted. But in this case, I like the player agency at play over here too. Of course, there were many other things that were showcased in some of this footage. You can again also go ahead and check it out on the main Phantom Blade Zero channel. But overall, it looks like a very promising game that diverges a bit more from your typical Souls clone and kind of does its own thing. It looks like a really nice combination between some of the Ninja Gaiden combat with some of the Souls exploration, bringing its own twist in the mix. Supposedly, it's aiming for fall 2026, but at some point in 2025, we should see a release date, as that's going to be coming soon as well. This is it for now. Let me know down below in the comments what's your opinion on Phantom Blade Zero, and is this a game that you're looking forward to play? Or if you have any concerns about it, let me know in the comments.